This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Wednesday, January 6, 2021, and my guest is the awesome Ross Rubin. Hi, Ross. How are you?
I'm doing super well. I'm very excited to be here. Happy New Year.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. It's CES soon, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, but I mostly want to talk about the news, the first few news of the year. There's a few things happening that are kind of exciting, so let's chat about that. The first thing, of course, the big news of the week, I feel, is like we finally have a date for Samsung. January 14th launch for the S21 line. Wow, what a roller coaster this leak business has been. What's your thoughts on, first of all, the announcement date, what you expect, all that stuff that's coming on the 14th? In general, what's your thought about where Samsung came from and where they're headed?
So, from what we've seen of the design, I really kind of like this new, I'm not sure what the industrial design term is, but this new little curved out area for the camera. I find it a lot more elegant than the bump that you guys have talked about before on the podcast and how widely imitated that was. But this is the flagship. This is their most important launch of the year. It's their most mainstream premium device. And it really sets the pace, I think, in many ways for what we can expect from the premium segment for the rest of the year. Of course, one wrinkle this year is the fate of the Note and how that will be resolved and what the S Pen capabilities will be here. But it seems to represent a new chapter for the S series.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to seeing what, if all these leaks and rumors have been confirmed. Obviously, I'm pretty sure that they have. Like, you know how it goes. This stuff is pretty accurate these days, these leaks and rumors. So, yeah, I think I'm excited insofar that I'm always happy to see some flagships from Samsung. Like, they are good phones, and they're going to be bought in droves. So there's no doubt about that. But I think that things have changed a bit, right? Like, I feel like I don't know if as many people are going to end up buying these S series phones this year as normal. And I really hope that Samsung has a strategy, especially with the carriers in the US, to have more of the A series on deck for those people who don't really feel like they need an S series. Or, this is what I'm really hoping for, is that the base S21, which is rumored to have less RAM than last year, is, and possibly less storage. I'm not sure exactly, but that it basically starts at $750 or $800, like more like iPhone 12 pricing than iPhone 12 Pro pricing. And if we start there, I think we can go somewhere. I felt the S20 was just a little too expensive, even at the very base level. And I think that it's hard to sell the American market on an A series, even though they're really great phones. So I think that maybe they just need to dilute the S series a bit. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, like the S20 Fan Edition last year is kind of that dilution I'm talking about. Why not, instead of making that a separate phone, kind of start at that base price, sacrifice some things like a plastic back or whatever, have the industrial design still down pat, and then go from there.
So in years past, they would do that light sub-brand. And
yeah, there was the S10e, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the phone you're describing would probably obviate that, but probably not with the marketing angle that the Fan Edition came with.
Yeah, it's interesting how much they marketed the Fan Edition in a way. I think it was a course correction, wouldn't you say? Because they didn't do well with the S20, right?
So, yeah, you talked about it on a previous episode about how this is their attempt to try to capture some of that OnePlus lightning in a bottle and say, here's a group of Samsung enthusiasts that we're trying to cater to, or perhaps even broaden our reach to a new class of Samsung enthusiasts. And of course, Samsung resisted bringing the A series to the US for a long time. So I think you're right, and that they really do want to keep the US market focused on the S series for a range of reasons. And of course, you talk about the parity with Apple or the need to compete head to head with Apple. Even with the Mini, Apple doesn't really have I guess, maybe the SE, but they don't really have anything like the A series or the J series, with these lower end value handsets, smartphones. So they kind of need to meet Apple at their entry level.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see. I think that, I'm trying to think, like, actually, I just had to stop because I'm thinking about it. Like, what is the equivalent of the iPhone SE in Samsung land? There's nothing in the S series. I think the A series, like the A51, A71, 5G are probably there somewhere in that 350 to 500, because it's hard. Like, there's very few phones that are exactly $400. 350 is common, 500 is common. I suppose there's a couple of Android phone I can think of, like the Moto 1 5G on AT&T, that's 400. And we're going to talk about Moto in a second, but I feel like, I don't think Samsung should worry about the SE. Like, I think that they might want to worry about the Mini, though, because nobody's making a small Android phone other than maybe the Xperia 5 Mark II that's any good right now in that form factor, in my opinion.
Well, you could also argue that the Mini did a lot to dampen enthusiasm for the SE, which had only come out a few months prior, right?
Yeah, but it's still a lot more expensive. I think the SE addresses a very different market. I mean, I look at my spouse, they bought an SE 2020 because they wanted the home button. See, like it wasn't even about cost at that point. I mean, cost was a gravy. They were getting an A13 Bionic, which was an incredible chipset, and a phone with wireless charging, water resistance. You don't see wireless charging, water resistance on an Android phone at $400. Never mind even $500 half the time. So it's a very unique.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm sympathetic, but I still think that the home button is on extended borrowed time.
Oh, for sure. No. I mean, that's not.
Yeah.
But my point is, for some people, that's still why they buy it. For others, I think it's just the cheapest iPhone, and they know they're not sacrificing much because they're getting a really good chip, wireless charging, water resistance, all the basics that they need, and a good, even if it's just one camera, it's like the Pixel 4a. You get one camera, but damn, it's a good camera, right?
It also goes, to the point about consumer perception, whether more cameras equals better imaging, which I think we saw a lot of feeding of that myth. I guess you could call it a myth. Maybe 2-3 years ago, LG, I think, did a lot to push that kind of marketing forward, and now, of course, with these ultra high resolution sensors, not necessarily as true, but I think a harder case to make.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting. I just hope that the S line can start in the $700. Even $799 might look emotionally like the right price for an entry-level S21. And then it can go up. I don't care if it goes up to $1,299. I think higher than that is hard to sell, considering the Note 20 Ultra was such a great package for, I think, that price. That's kind of, I think, the sweet spot in terms of premium. Add RAM and storage for higher prices beyond that. But if you can buy the best phone at around $1,200, 12, 13, I think that's what I'm looking forward to. And I'm particularly excited about the S21 because the leaks are showing it to have what we saw on the P40 Pro Plus from Huawei: 2 telephotos, one 3 megapixel, one 10 megapixel. As an imaging centric person, with my phenomenal experience on the Note 20 Ultra and my phenomenal experience with the P40 Pro Plus, this brings that level of imaging to the North American, the US, the Canadian, the Western markets with GMS and all the stuff that we would be missing on a P40 Pro Plus. So I'm on board for that. And I love the industrial design. I think it's finally nice to see Samsung. Like, I don't know what it was, but when I was in San Francisco last year for the S20 launch, I remember thinking to myself, okay, the Z Flip is cool, but what is with the boring design on these phones other than the colors, the pink and the blue, especially the S20 Ultra, the top line one? Like, it was only available in basically black, it seemed like. And I was like, what are you smoking, Samsung? Like, at least make a white version, ceramic or something like Huawei does.
Didn't they bring one fun color to the US?
On the S20 Ultra? Or the regular S20s, yeah.
A blue, like it was like a deep blue, I think.
Oh, yeah, maybe you're right. But I don't know if that's the Ultra. I think the bottom line is that at the launch, at least, it was like, these phones are really, like, they could be anything. Like, they could be generic Qualcomm, dev kit phone from a distance. You wouldn't know the difference. And I feel that was a miss, because then they found their footing again with the Note. And I always felt that the Note had a more... And I think part of it is the edgy, squarish design, but I think that it has a much more unique footprint in its kind of a visual appearance from a distance, even from the back, from the front. Whereas the S series has always been kind of like, but this year particular, I felt like 2020 was particularly hard. And then this design was seeing these leaks. That looks different, like the camera pod melting onto the side, like, and then the kind of like copper accents, like that's Samsung. That's you creating an identity for yourself. That's important, Samsung. So I'm excited about that. We're also expecting other things, earbuds, probably a new pair of Galaxy Buds of some kind. I've not really been following into great details because I haven't really been that excited with their Buds products.
Well, we did see a lot of discounting on their Buds toward in the holiday season, but there was a lot of discounting in general because I think we were just, at least in the US, reaching a fair amount of saturation on
Buds. Oh my God, yeah.
True wireless earbuds. Yeah, a lot of Buds out there. Yeah.
But some of them are better than others, and that's the thing that I'm excited about, is that we're starting to see some decent Buds, like high quality products at a good price point. Like we're seeing stuff at $40, $50, $70, $80 that doesn't suck. Like the TCL earbuds I recently got from Brad, and the OnePlus Buds that I reviewed, the OnePlus Buds Z as well, that are cheaper than the OnePlus Buds. To me, like, it's kind of like, why would you even bother with the AirPods? Unless you're going for the AirPods Pro, which are a unique proposition. It's interesting how True Wireless has found its footing in 2020, possibly because of pandemic. But I feel like anything over $100 for True Wireless earbuds, you're overpaying.
Regardless of ANC?
Regardless of it, because I don't think ANC is a valid thing for earbuds. I think if you want ANC, go for headphones, do it right. You can get decent ANC on earbuds, but why? Like, why do you even, to me, earbuds are the things you wear when you're walking down the street to go to the shop, when you're exercising in the gym. Maybe I can see a point for having ANC in the gym, because gyms can be loud, but gyms are not happening right now. At least I hope they're not.
Train. I mean, not so much commuting this year, but historically.
Yeah, but I feel like, I guess you're right. It's a choice and a comfort level thing. Some people don't like big sweaty headphones. Some people don't want the thing stuck in their ears. So but to me, like, if I'm going to be on a bus or a train or a plane, it's going to be headphones with like proper ANC, completely immersive.
It's worth it.
It's worth it, because I have not, even with the AirPods Pro, I have not experienced a pair of ANC earbuds that still meets my standards. I haven't tried the new Bose ones, but I still don't think you can do it as well. Like, I think Apple is going to continue iterating. We're going to get a Pro 2 or whatever, revised, and it's going to be better, but it's not going to be as good as the Pro Maxes or the Sony WH-1000X M4.
Right.
Or M3s even. Because I don't think you necessarily have to pay up for the fourth right now if you want to get a good deal. Speaking of, by the way, I did receive Shure's Ionic, or whatever they're called, their True Wireless headphones. And I want to just give them a quick love here because they're superb. I am impressed. The ANC is not the best, but it's definitely good. It's not like Sony good. But in terms of sound quality, they are, for me, for my taste, which are very neutral and flat, they're definitely, you can tell these are made by musicians for musicians for the pro audio market, that there's that pro audio vibe in there. They sound like my Beyer Dynamics. They sound superb, and they're expensive. I'm not sure I'd recommend them. They don't fold up very well. They're not very travel friendly. But if you want something comfortable around the house with active noise canceling, the Shures have really, really impressed me. Like, kudos to them. I mean, these are not a new product. They came out like almost, I think, at CES possibly last year. They finally just sent me a device. So it's like, oh, thanks. It's a little late, but okay. So yeah, I mean, what else do you expect we're going to see from Samsung? Like, I think they might surprise us with an updated Flip, though. Although there's been no rumors, maybe they've managed to keep something close to their chests. unless that's being launched separately in a few months.
Yeah. I think timing would line up well for that, particularly given Moto updated a few months ago. So
yeah, I mean, they did update the Flip with the 5G version in the summer. It's the same physical phone, essentially, with a new processor, right? But I don't know. I think the Flip is definitely due for an update. The cameras are okay for 2020, but they were still just okay in 2020. So now they need to be S21 or at least S20 grade for 2021. And, that's, I think, the biggest thing that I'd want to see updated on the Z Flip. The Z Flip is a phenomenal phone. I really enjoyed it. It's not something I would necessarily recommend to anyone because, ultimately, once you unfold it, it's just the size of a regular phone. But if you, for some reason, really feel like when your phone is stowed away, it needs to be significantly smaller, between Moto with the Razr, especially the Razr 5G, because it's the better of the two, and the Z Flip, whether you get the Z Flip or Z Flip 5G, I think the Samsung one is just a much better product, much more refined, much more sorted. It just feels like it feels like they're one step ahead of everyone else on foldable, probably because they are, it was tough with the original Fold, right? But they had an extra year, right?
So how do you see the proposition on those? Do you think of it as, you kind of described it as, do you think it's really about reaching that smaller size? Is there incremental benefit to that? Or do you think it's kind of more of a fashion statement? Or
I think it's a bit of both, but I think that there's a cool factor that's undeniable. Every time I show somebody that, because I open it, at my local coffee shop to pay with it or something, people are every time their eyes go, what did I just see? What just happened? And I think that's going to go away, you're going to say, with time. But I think that also maybe it is something that people want. And maybe Samsung surprises us and makes a sub $1,000 phone with that feature. And then it becomes a more normal thing. And then it's just an option you have. And I think, look, some people don't have big pockets, don't want to take up a lot of real estate in their pocket. And if you can make it thin enough, I think the Z Flip right now folded it's thicker than a normal phone, but it's not that bad. Even the Razr is not. So I think that if you can get that a little further down in thickness to the point where it's like 1.2, 1.3 centimeter, 13, 14 millimeters, it's only 50% thicker than a pretty big flagship today, which is typically 8 to 9 millimeters. I think that you can get to a point where you have a benefit in terms of comfort. And for some people, that's undeniably important. And then the other thing is, can they make them more, I'm not going to say rugged, because I really don't feel that the Z Flip particularly is fragile. And lots of people have abused them and shown that they're pretty solid. But more things like water resistance, right? Like you can't really dunk that phone. If there is a way they can, with a combination of waterproofing both halves and making the display such that it's inert to water, like it has a nano repellent coating just for the part that's flexible, so that both electronic halves are water resistant, and then the middle part is like somehow coated with some protection, that you can at least drop it in the tub, like what I maybe IP57 instead of IP68, like to the point where like you don't have to worry about spilling a drink on it, and you can rinse it under the sink as long as you dry it really quickly. Samsung's A-okay with you, right? Like if you can get to that point, I think we're done. Like I think then it becomes a mainstream product. Yes, it's still always going to be more fragile. There's more moving parts, and you have a thin display that, yes, if you poke through it hard enough, you're going to break it. Like there's just nothing you can do about that. But then again, if you poke through a glass display hard enough, you're going to break it too. So,
Sure, but they're also saying that future folds should be compatible with S Pen. I mean, certainly today the folding ThinkPad, you can use a stylus with that, and you can get pretty aggressive with it. Different technologies, different display technologies, but
I think it's going to happen. Yeah, there's no doubt they can make the display more rugged, but I feel like that's not what's stopping right now this technology. I think it's more like things like what at that price people expect, like water resistance, etc. And then the challenge I found for me is also things like the Razr does a better job with this, where you can use it closed to some extent because it's got that bigger front display. And especially if you go to to do contactless payment, it's very intuitive because you know where the front and the back clearly are, but just you can pull it out of your pocket, put your finger on the fingerprint sensor because you can feel it. It's like a little dimple in the back, and you can just tap it on the terminal. You don't have to even look at your phone. You just pick it up, put your finger on the thing, tap it, you pay. Whereas with the Z Flip, you really have to go like, okay, is it upright? Like, is it the right, like, because the display is so small, it's really hard to tell whether if you pull it out of your pocket, you've got it upside down or down the right side up. And then there's no, like, it doesn't let you unlock it when it's closed. Like the side-mounted fingerprint sensor does not unlock the phone unless the phone is open. So you can't really do, like, you have to fold it open to pay at a terminal. And also, I think the NFC chip is on the upper half, meaning the half with the display and the camera, whereas on the Razr it's on the lower half. So like that's another thing, like you have to think. On a normal phone you don't think. You know that if you roughly point the camera pod at the terminal, it will work. But I found that with the folding phones, even when I had the Z Fold 2, the big folder, I was like, which side, how do I pay? How does that work again? Like you have to kind of mentally think, and sometimes it misses. You know, the terminal says I didn't get the card, and then you readjust the phone.
Well, that happens with all of them.
The moment you have to readjust the phone for contactless payment, you've lost, right?
I totally agree, and yet it still feels more natural for me than using a smartwatch.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I think maybe they can solve this by having an NFC coil on both sides. Like that way you don't have to worry about it. It picks one or the other.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's something that they're working on. But look, the reality is, S Pen or whatever is coming to the Fold and the Flip in some way or another, for sure. Definitely the Fold. I wouldn't be surprised if 2021 Fold, whatever, the Fold 3, Z Fold 3, Z Fold, whatever it's going to be called. What a weird name. What's with the Z in there? Why?
Because it looks like something folding.
Is the Flip brand. Yeah, I think S is the flagship, Note is the Note, Z is the folding because of the Z shape of the...
Because it looks like a Z, yeah.
God, weird.
A Z folds, yes.
Anyway, let's talk OnePlus. The OnePlus Nord N10 5G and the OnePlus Nord N100 that were announced for Europe back in I don't want to say November-ish, finally are available officially in the US with proper bands for the US and for North America in general. And the pricing is extremely competitive. That's the thing that's got me excited, and I want to hear your thoughts on that. $299 for the N10 5G. It's really $300 because it's $299.99, and $180 for the N100. And I say that I don't say $179 because again it's $99, but also T-Mobile literally says $180 on their website for that one. So T-Mobile is the only carrier in North America of all the carriers, including Canada, to get it, which is crazy to me. And it actually makes sense because at least the 5G one, the N10 5G, only supports, at least currently, T-Mobile's 5G sub-6. It has the band for AT&T, but if you put an AT&T SIM in there, it doesn't give you the 5G option. Even a SIM that is valid provision for 5G, it doesn't work. You can't get 5G on AT&T with that phone, even though it has the band listed, 850 megahertz N5. And then Verizon, forget it. Like, it gives you LTE on Verizon no matter what SIM card you put in there.
Sure.
So it's odd to me that they would launch this phone to the US market, but then it only really works properly with T-Mobile. And then, but then they're selling it in Canada, and I don't have the pricing in front of me for Canada, but the pricing for Canada is not good. It's significantly more. It's more like the European pricing, which I thought was a miss back when it launched. So, thoughts?
Well, yeah. So OnePlus has had a long, strong relationship with T-Mobile. T-Mobile was really the first carrier to support OnePlus coming in, and so from that perspective, it's not surprising that they would be collaborating on this. Well, it's funny. It depends on how you look at it. Some people look at the Nord as OnePlus sort of returning to its roots in delivering strong value at that lower price point. I think it's kind of interesting seeing them trying to come up with a phone that has inherent compromises with the motto of never settle. But we can talk more about that in terms of whether that's a competitive kind of rallying cry. But the $300 price point for 5G that's really what the carrier's priorities are pushing those 5G devices, and the more aggressive they can get on that, I think the more the more support they're inclined to give it. The 4G version is a little bit more of a head scratcher for me, at least, because it seems to me that once you get down to that sub $200 price point, and maybe we'll see some of this showing up at, for example, Metro PCS here in the U.S. But I think a lot of those buyers tend to be more traditionally brand driven. LG, Motorola, Nokia. I don't know if they necessarily know or appreciate the OnePlus brand. So there's going to be a lot of competitors in that space. So I'm just sort of less sure what the appeal there will be.
Yeah, for me, it's basically, I maintain what I've said all along since I reviewed the N10 5G for Europe back in November, which I feel like the original Nord that dropped in August was OnePlus at its best. It basically, and in a way, they cannibalized themselves in some ways with that phone. They made a OnePlus 8 essentially that had a 765G chip in it and sold it for literally $300 less in its respective market in Europe. It never came to the US, which is, I think, the biggest disappointment I have about it. But, agreeing with what you just said about the T-Mobile history they have in the US, it didn't make sense for them to bring the original Nord to T-Mobile because they were still full of stock of the OnePlus 8. And the OnePlus 8, they were good to cannibalize those sales. And also they have the OnePlus 8V, the Verizon version, which had millimeter wave, which was a custom one-off that obviously they would step on Verizon's toes if they came out with a Nord, even if T-Mobile sold a Nord for, say, $550, which I think would have been a very good and very, very well-placed price in the US. But so they shot themselves in the foot because they make this great phone that kind of dethroned their lesser flagship, the OnePlus 8, in many ways, and at the same time that the carriers weren't going to touch with a 10-foot pole. And then they had to come around with a T version of the 8, and they really didn't know what to do with that because it was already so high, the 8, the price. They said, well, at least for North America, what they did was they said, well, let's pump the RAM to max, like 12 gigs and like 256 gigs or so, like go spec crazy on what's easy to change, like RAM and stuff. And then we're going to sell it for $50 more than the 8. Of course, the 8 was on sale for $100 less at the time, but it was still a really weird strategy. It didn't seem to make much sense. Whereas in Europe, it was clear, like you had the 8T was replacing the 8. It was priced exactly the same. Of course, you were going to buy the better one. And then it was a mild difference anyway. So whether you got the 8 or the 8T, the only thing really changed was the flat display on the 8T versus the curved edges. And personally, I'd rather have the flat. So that was clear. But then the Nord was kind of like the cheaper option. And it was true and true a OnePlus phone. And then you had the 8 Pro, which makes sense in both North America and Europe to me, because it truly is the first time that OnePlus has given us a no-bars flagship. But then when the N10 5G and N100 were announced, I was like, wait a minute, that's not where you play OnePlus. Like, stay in your lane here. And I'm not saying that in the bad way. I'm not against OnePlus going in that lane if they did it the OnePlus way. But the N10 5G is outclassed by even BBK's own Realme 7 5G, a phone that is better in every way, costs less in Europe because that's not available in the US. And right. I'm like, what happened here? You let your cousin or sibling or whatever you want to call, like, out OnePlus you? Like, things like not having the alert slider on there, the full plastic build. And it's not just that it's plastic. Like, obviously the fan edition from Samsung, the S20 FE, is plastic back, and it's not the best material, but it still feels premium. It's got that matte finish. It looks cool. Whereas, like, and it's the same with the Realme. That Realme phone that is better than the Nord N10 5G has a much better fit and finish. It's plastic too, but somehow they use the cheapest, like, Fisher Price grade plastic on this N10 5G. And I don't know, I haven't played with the N100, but I'm like, you lost the plot, basically. It's like, yes, you made it an affordable 5G phone, but you sacrificed the hardware and it's not living up to OnePlus standards. And then the pricing wasn't that aggressive in Europe. But now that they're selling it for $300, I'm like, okay, I'm willing to look past all that plastic madness, plastic fantastic, and go with the fact that, yeah, you're making the cheapest US available 5G phone. And you're going to say, who cares about 5G, right? Yeah, you're right. But at the same time, 5G is going to become pretty quickly very relevant. And on T-Mobile, it's definitely a plus. You get better performance on T-Mobile. It's marginal, but you still get better performance. So at that point, it makes sense. The only thing that's still kind of iffy to me, while the price in the US balances out the crappy hardware, it's not crappy, it just feels crappy. Like, it's a good phone overall. But the thing that does concern me more, and I haven't tried the N100, so it's probably worse on the N100, is that the 690 doesn't quite live up. Even with Oxygen OS, which is a phenomenal user experience, doesn't quite live up to what you expect from a OnePlus phone. You lost that kind of like telepathic instantaneousness of the user experience that is such a trademark for OnePlus. The thing that makes you feel like your phone is just faster than your brain, And you don't get that. Granted, you don't get that on some other phones either. Like, I think you have to pretty much buy a OnePlus, and I can think of maybe a handful of really high-end flagships on Android, like the Note series, that come to that level of reflex kind of speed. And you're going to say, well, 690, what do you expect, Miriam? But I'm like, that's the problem. It's like part of OnePlus's premise was this super smooth user experience. And they're trying here because of the 90 hertz display. And I have to say, it is very slick to use Oxygen OS even on that lower end hardware. But it lost that specialness. And then you combine that with the hardware not being special, and you're like, so you're pumping out generic phones, OnePlus, right? And the only thing differentiating you...
So not living up to the brand promise.
Yeah, and then differentiating you is Oxygen. And then you don't want to provide the same level of updates and upgrades. Like you're shipping with Android 10 when your flagships have Android 11, and you're only promising one OS update. And it's like, that's another thing that you dilute. So I think, as I said, and you've heard this on the show, I think OnePlus has had some growing pains in figuring out where they want to be. I don't think they should necessarily avoid being in this N10, N100 price point, but I think they can do it better. Realme has shown it can be done better, and I'm a little vexed that they are not. It seems that they're just complacent about it, especially after the Nord, the original, which was so incredibly great for the money. So I'm a little torn, and the strategy here in the US, yes, kudos on the price, but if you really think about it, it only makes sense if you're a T-Mobile customer. And at that point, you can buy the T-Mobile locked version and get probably an incredible deal through a subsidy. And then you don't have to even look at the unlocked version. And you're probably not the customer who cares about unlocked versus locked at that point. And you might have heard from your, tech-savvy early adopter friends that OnePlus is the thing, and now you walk into the T-Mobile store, and I can see all that. But I don't know, the N100, the only thing that makes me feel good about the N100 is that at its price point, it just blows away everything else at that price. Like 4 gigs of RAM, is unheard of at $180 in the US. I just want to put that out there. If you're listening from Europe or Asia right now, you're probably laughing hysterically at all the Xiaomis and the Oppos and Vivos and whatever that have 4 gigs of RAM at that price point. But here in the US, we've never seen that. Like Moto, and this is going to be a good segue for us, Moto just launched the new G series, and you're lucky to get like 3 gigs of RAM on half these phones. Do you feel like the market in the US, is there even room other than the prepaid market for these phones?
Well, I was going to say, I think T-Mobile, carriers sometimes almost, I don't want to say dictate, but they, work closely with handset makers on a specific set of requirements, that they need and see, can you fulfill this for us? And, we talked a bit about the partnership. It's a very different set of circumstances and a very different set of specifications. But in some ways, it reminds me a little bit of what T-Mobile did with CoolPad a few years ago, coming out with that sub $100 big screen phone. And now, 5G is their priority. So maybe, and of course, nobody knew who CoolPad was here in the US either. So I'm wondering if it's sort of a similar circumstance. We need this. We need to hit this price point. You're a close partner of ours. Get this done for us, kind of.
Yeah, and in that sense, it might make sense. I honestly do feel that I'd be very happy to walk into a T-Mobile store and see, this N100 next to like a Stylo or whatever LG, like some really cheap. And in the section of the T-Mobile store that says, Metro by T-Mobile, now it's no longer called Metro PCS. Like, I'd be happy to see that, but at the same time, I'm like, this is not a OnePlus phone. Like you're selling just a generic, cheap. And OnePlus is going to insist and tell me no, but there's Oxygen OS on there. And yeah, Oxygen OS is a really great experience. But come on, like you've diluted the hardware so much at this point. I don't know how that works. Like, I want OnePlus to go back to doing, like they need to bring something like the original Nord to the US this year. We badly, desperately need a phone that can compete with the Pixel 4a 5G, right? If you can give me that level of love and performance and amazement, please do it, because that's where you play. That's what you're good at. And then, do that on T-Mobile and still sell it unlocked, but also make sure it works on the other carriers as 5G. Like none of the OnePlus phones for the US in 2020 have had 5G support for anything but T-Mobile, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, Moto, what's your take? Have you looked at the phones real quick? Does this matter?
Well, I mean, I sometimes kind of wonder so they're really filling out the G series, and that's been a trend over the past maybe 3 generations, I would say, to the point where it has really pushed further down to where the E has become this sort of weird, one SKU, kind of device at to your point, kind of what is the least expensive device, we can make that fulfills a bare minimum requirement. So, from what I've heard about the devices, it seems to fulfill at least some of the promises that we've come to expect with the series. For example, very long battery life, or at least very big batteries in terms of, I think, they're promising 2 to 3 days on a charge. Whether it lives up to that, we'll see. But that's certainly one thing that stood out for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the thing that is exciting about these phones is that I think they're necessary. Like the G series, I mean, Moto we got to thank them for kind of being like the company who made these $200-$300 phones a thing that was important and not sucky. Like they're the first to make
quality mid-range.
Yeah, cheaper, more affordable phones that didn't suck. And OnePlus is trying to do that, and I think a lot of Chinese phones are trying to do that nowadays. And I think Moto invented that. This is before their days at even Google, so never mind Lenovo. And they've managed to continue that, and I admire them for that. I think the G series has always been very solid. And in North America, for the longest time, this was the only place to go if you wanted a really good, affordable phone, right? That's changing now with OnePlus in the game. And in many ways, I feel TCL, yeah, thanks for bringing them up for sure.
Yep.
But I feel like there's 4 phones here. The G Play, which is the entry level, is kind of playing, pardon the pun, into that N100 range. And if you compare, the prices are very similar, but then again, the specs are much, much better on the N100. So maybe OnePlus does have a leg to stand on here. It's $169, so $170 for the Moto and $180 for the OnePlus. But, the Moto is giving you a Snapdragon 460 versus, I think actually it is also a 400 series on the N100. But the N100 gives you 90 hertz, right? And it gives you an even bigger battery, 6,000 milliamp hours. So like it's got a bunch of things under its wing that I think make it a better phone. Then you've got the G Power, which the Power has always been the long battery life phone from Moto. But it's interesting, you probably don't feel that way because you don't look too much at the Chinese market or the phones made by Chinese companies going to India and Europe. But 6,000 milliamp hour is a pretty normal thing in this price point in China, okay? So the G Power only having 5,000 milliamp hour, it's good, but it's not really that special. Now, combined with, a Snapdragon 600 series, I think it's a 678 or 662 or something like that, it's gonna provide pretty damn great battery life, maybe 3 days, like this is what they advertise. But it does have a 48 megapixel camera, so it does pixel binning. That's always a welcome thing. Even though Moto is not the best at making cameras, you do notice the difference when you in low light. A big screen, but it's only a 720p display. Again, at the G Play price point, at the N100 price point, you only have 720p. But the G Power is $199 for 32 gigs with, I think, 3 gigs of RAM, and it's $250 for 64 gigs. Like, now you're starting to play in the heart of Chinese phone territory, and you can import these phones and they'll work just fine on LTE in the US. And then, you're going to say this doesn't matter to people who walk into a Metro or Cricket store or
Right.
I get it, but I'm saying I don't know, like that's not where the value is for me. And then the G Stylus at least has the uniqueness of the stylus, which comes back this year. And that's a 678 processor from Qualcomm, also 48 megapixel camera, quad camera system. And that one's $300. And again, at that point, you're like, forget it. Like, it doesn't matter even if you don't have 5G. The Nord N10 5G from OnePlus, get that, $300, same price, works on all the 4G LTE networks. It's a way better phone in every way. Other than, of course, you might want the stylus, but it's capacitive. So just buy like a little, or just go on eBay and buy the stylus from the G Stylus from last year as a spare part and carry that in your pocket or something. I don't know.
It's not a USI because Lenovo's been a supporter of USI.
As far as I know, it's just purely a capacitive nub at the end, a very thin capacitive nub at the end of the. There is some software though. They have a Notes app that is optimized for that. It detects when the pen is pulled out of the slot, like kind of like Note does, with a little magnet. Right. But like, honestly, no, just buy an N10 5G at that point, even if you don't use the 5G feature, buy the unlocked. And then there's the Ace, and this is where I think they lost the plot, right?
This is the one, right?
The one 5G Ace is, first of all, it's not a G series. Like, why did they... And we asked them about that in the briefing, and they said, well, we felt that it was spec-wise closer to what we'd expect from a 1 series phone. And it's interesting because they've on and off sold the 1 series phones in the US, but the Moto 1 family is really more of a European and other markets play. And it hasn't really been that strong in the US. And so randomly they make a 1 phone, but I think they should consolidate on the G line in the US and really pump it out. This should have been a Moto G 5G. In fact, the Moto 1 5G Ace for the US is exactly the same phone as the Moto G 5G in Europe that was just launched. So it's really weird to me, the naming. What's exciting about this phone is that it has the Snapdragon 750G. This is the first time we're seeing that in the US, number one. Number two, so far you can only get phones from Xiaomi with that chip. So we're going to talk about Xiaomi in a second, but it's interesting to finally see that the processor coming to the US market. Again, quad camera, 48 megapixel. No, it's a triple camera. Interesting. So it's going back to what the G Power provide. But it's $400. Explain this to me for a second, Ross. You're an analyst. You might be able to steer me the right way here. I don't get this. I reviewed the Moto 1 5G, which is not the 5G Ace. So the Ace is kind of a lesser version of the Moto 1 5G because it's got a lesser processor and less cameras on it. It costs $400, the Moto 1 5G that I reviewed in the summer or September. $400 on a contract on AT&T. Now, it's $450, I think, or $500 with millimeter wave on Verizon, right? And you pay the millimeter wave tax. But nonetheless, why would you spend $400 of your money on this new Ace that's a lesser phone than you walk into an AT&T store and you buy? I mean, you have to be an AT&T customer, I guess. But do you feel the carriers still have that much say? Like, it doesn't make sense to me that Moto cannot sell these phones unlocked at the same time like OnePlus does.
Well, for the millimeter wave, that's just not going to have a lot of application outside.
No, absolutely. But I'm surprised they don't have a base. Like when they sold the 1 5G, there was never an unlocked version. It's like a lot like LG does. There's no unlocked version for the US for a lot of their phones.
I'm sure that will come in time.
Yet the Ace is clearly an unlocked phone. But why price it the same price when it's a lesser phone when you can probably get a discount on the other one? Or you can probably buy an AT&T model for $400, full price at the store, and then get it unlocked and it'll still work for you. Like, it's just weird to me.
I would just, I think in the US over the past few years, Unlocked has certainly grown and awareness has grown. But, the carrier model is still very strong here, and people, particularly on these monthly plans, when they're ready for the next thing, they see what's available in the portfolio, and don't do the kind of diligence you're talking about.
No, for sure. I mean, that's definitely a problem. I just feel like it's just weird to me that when I asked them about the pricing, I said, you're not being very competitive based on what OnePlus just literally announced yesterday. They're like, well, you can't say that. And I'm like, why not? And they're like, because we are going to be selling these through carriers at a discount right away. And I'm like, why don't you give me the discounted price then? Like, don't mess with me. Like, I don't need, like,
because that's not their job. They don't want to scoop their own. They don't want to step on their carrier partner toes.
I know. What I'm also trying to say, and you know this, is that it's like the bargains bin phenomenon, right? Where within weeks, if not days, of these phones actually being announced, we're going to see them on sale, like on Amazon, officially, by Motorola. And I'm like, what is this weird strategy? You come out with this lofty, ridiculous price. We scream about it, and then 2 or 3 days later, is this like a psychological thing where you think the customer really noticed that the price of this not really important in the great scheme of things phone has gone down in the last 3 days? They don't notice. So why not give me the price, like the real, like where? I don't know. That's my point.
It's like on Wish.com where everything is sold at a 97% discount from the. A belt, you can buy it at a discount off the $3,000 price.
Yeah, basically.
So, yeah.
Oh, goodness. So anyway, that's Moto for you folks. I have the phones, so stay tuned. I'll probably talk about them a little more once the review embargo lifts, which I think is later sometime next week. And look, I like what Moto's doing. Like, I think I like the 1 series. I like the G series. I just wish they were priced a little more competitively. And the other thing that I want to bring up, we talked about really quickly, is no NFC on the G series here at all.
It's crazy.
The 1.5G Ace does have NFC, but here's a weird thing, Ross. In the past, in other markets, like the same phones that we got G series in the US were sold in Europe and even in South America with NFC enabled. It seems like it's in there, but it's disabled in the US, at least in the past. Last year, the stylus and the power we were in Moto in February, the last trip I took before COVID, they showed us last year's G stylus and G power. And again, they didn't have NFC. And I said, well, guys, like, come on. What? And they're like, yeah, we know at this price point, we don't think it's important. And then COVID hit. And then now I said to them, like, look, guys, like now you should have NFC on there, right? Because COVID. And they're like, no, like, first of all, we feel like people don't go out and pay with their phones and their credit cards. They order stuff online, get it delivered. Secondly, we put it on the Ace because at that price point, we feel it's necessary, but we still don't, it still doesn't hit the top 5 list of things we think people need, like battery life, display size, cameras. And I'm like, fair enough, but I still feel like it's so cheap. If it was $10 to add to the phone, I'd get it. It's probably 10 cents to add to the phone at this point. Weird to me.
I would agree. I think it's just sort of crossed that chasm of expectations at this point. I can understand things maybe like wireless charging. I know you're a big fan, for example, but NFC, I mean, yes, totally agree with your points about the pandemic applications. But regardless, I just think it's entering the zeitgeist, so to speak.
And their take, they're like, yeah, we live here, we're Americans, we get it. We see how it's proliferating, but they feel that it's still not. They feel that the average consumer still doesn't use NFC, contactless payment, pay by phone, Google Pay, Apple Pay enough to make it into these phones. And they also feel that it's going to be superseded by other technologies. They told me today they feel that paying by barcode QR code like China is doing is going to become a thing in the US. And I'm like, there's no freaking way. That's going to stay a specialty thing at Starbucks, you know, where you get your points and you pay at the same time, because they developed this app and this whole system years ago before NFC was prevalent, and they are continuing to use it. And I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I don't see it turning around. The banks have spent so much time on this. They're not going to suddenly adopt a pay by barcode system.
I got to say, when you said that they thought it was going to be superseded by another technology, I thought the next words out of your mouth were going to be ultra wideband, not QR codes.
Let's not go there. I mean, it's, you know, the thing that drives me nuts is that we're at a point now, like Bluetooth is 20 years old, right? A bit more now. I think it was 98, 99 when it was finally released in a product. And we're finally just getting to use it properly and have devices that are really rock solid with Bluetooth in the last 5 years, I would say. Cars have it now. You know, true wireless earbuds are a thing. Wireless headphones, they were a thing 10 years ago. They existed. They just sucked. Now they're finally good. So I can kind of understand that maybe they feel that the NFC experience sucks, but I feel like NFC's been with us for almost as long. Like, I would say Nokia had NFC on their freaking Symbian phones, like, what was it, like 2009, 8, something like that. I know all the Windows phones they made had at least NFC or an optional NFC in a case that you could like add on to the phone. Like, why is NFC such a big obstacle for manufacturing? Like, Chinese manufacturers were not on board. They're finally learning that the US market wants NFC. Remember how OnePlus with the OnePlus 2 actually removed NFC from that flagship phone, and they got destroyed by the US media. And they looked at us, they were like, in a panic, they're like, what have we done? And we're like, yeah, you did it. You messed that up real bad. And they're like, we had no idea. I'm like, do your freaking market research. You're catering to the tech-savvy early adopters and you don't have NFC on a phone that's supposedly a flagship killer? Go home. You're drunk.
Why is it even, I don't even understand why it's such a price obstacle in handsets when they can somehow work the functionality into a credit card.
I don't know.
I mean,
either.
it's not even just a phone thing anymore.
As I said, I don't think it's expensive to do. I think that somehow maybe there's some certifications that are expensive or something. I don't know what it is. But OnePlus learned their lesson. They have not made a phone without NFC since then. I have to check if the N100 has NFC or not. I don't think it does, but I'm willing to excuse that at $180. The Nord N10 5G certainly has an NFC. It's great. So if you want a phone, again, $300. I mean, it's kind of walking all over Moto's feet there. And
if you're going to pay for it wirelessly, there are certain Motorola phones you can't use to do that. Just FYI. So,
for sure,
because they don't have NFC.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of affordable phones, really quickly, there's a whole bunch of Xiaomi announcements. It's interesting how Xiaomi launched a flagship last week in China, and now they're a volley of phones for India and Europe. Quickly go through them. I'm not going to get into details. I'll link to various articles by my friends over at Android Police. Basically, the Redmi 9T, I have one, so it's basically the same as the Poco M3, but with the ultra-wide lens added. So it fixes the one deficiency of the Poco M3. The Poco M3, Ross, is a $149 phone that kicks ass, and like a lot of Xiaomi products. And so the Redmi 9T is a little more than that and adds the ultra-wide back. No NFC on these, by the way. But there is also a Redmi Note 9T, which is very similar to me looking to the other phone that Xiaomi launched this week, which is the Mi 10i 5G. And it's like Xiaomi is the master with their multiple brands, more so than BBK, at blending the parts bin. Like, it is insane. You look at phones, sometimes they release a phone 3 days apart with different brands, and you look at it and you're like, oh, you took the camera pod from this phone and the display from that phone and the battery from this phone and this processor. They were sitting on your shelf and you literally screwed them together because they had the same mounting points. And you're giving it a new name and you're selling it in this one niche market. Oh, this is only for Pakistan, or this is only for it's insane, but I kind of love it. I just cannot tell you how delighted I am that they make these really great phones. Like, they're affordable, they're nice to use, they have all the check boxes for most part, And you can scale, like you can literally take any price point with a $20 increment and get a decent phone with Xiaomi. Especially if you buy them online, because sometimes they're market specific, but Alibaba or GearBest or even Amazon will have them for the US market. And usually LTE, because they're Qualcomm chips, they're big friends with Qualcomm, at least the main bands are supported. So unless you live in the boonies in the US where you need that 600 megahertz LTE on T-Mo or whatever, you're good. And this is kind of where it's hard, I think. My audience obviously is going to prioritize the higher end, or at least the mid-range, $500+ phones, because they're tech-savvy early adopters that change phones often. But if you are that tech-savvy early adopter and you're right now hurting for money because COVID or whatever, and you want to continue enjoying getting phones regularly and changing and trying new things, I say look at these phones. They're $200-$300 phones, and they're just really, really interesting.
I think you have an idea for a subscription service brewing there. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Xiaomi phone of the month.
That would be such a startup. I mean, somebody needs to create like a company but instead of being like Samsung or Apple specific, which basically what they have, right?
Right.
You would do it to be a universal thing. That would be cool. Anyway, so the phones are the Redmi 9T, the Redmi Note 9T, the Xiaomi Mi 10i 5G, which honestly looks almost identical to the Xiaomi Mi 9T 5G in terms of specs. And then there's rumors of a Poco F2. There's a F2 Pro I reviewed for Android Police. The F1, the original Poco phone, was an incredible phone. It had a Snapdragon 800 series at the time, 2-3 years ago. I think it was an 845, I want to say, for $300. And it blew our minds because it was essentially a flagship for incredible price. The F2 Pro was $500 and had a Snapdragon 865. It was $200 more because that 865 is such a expensive chip. So there's rumors of a Poco F2 to kind of remedy that, to kind of find back that $300, $400 flagship kind of price. But I don't think they're going to do an 8 series on that. I think it's going to be a 765 or something like that, which honestly, you're not losing too much. So just be aware of that. That's coming. Rumors are strong. Let's talk about a good new chip from Qualcomm, the Snapdragon 480 5G. We finally have a 400 level 5G chip. That's kind of crazy to me, honestly. I'm not sure it's worth it. At the kind of price point these phones are targeting, $150, $180, $220 with these chips, presumably. Do we need 5G at that price point, Ross? What does your analysis say?
Well, I think that it's very relevant to a number of the phones we've discussed on the podcast, right? Talking about things like the OnePlus or the Motorola. You talked about a lot of the trade-offs there.
Right.
When the next year's edition, when the 21 editions of those phones come out, they're more likely going to be 5G, because that's one of the compromises you have to make right now when you enter into that price point, and they don't want to have to compromise on that. And as we discussed, both OnePlus and Motorola have been strong Qualcomm customers, and so when you have so much of your product line devoted to that supplier, the supplier wants to be able to offer choices throughout the portfolio. So I think it's as much about that versus there's such huge demand for 5G in this sub $200 segment.
Do you think so though? Like I feel like there's absolutely no doubt. Like it makes sense for me that Qualcomm made a 400 series chip with 5G, because that's what Qualcomm does. They want 5G on everything. It makes sense. It makes sense that the carriers would push 5G even at lower price points, and try to market it, right? But do the consumers really care? Like I don't feel they care, and I don't feel they benefit yet. At least on T-Mo, you might see some benefits, but these are sub-6 phones. 480 is a sub-6 chip like the 690. I don't think people are going to really benefit on AT&T and Verizon yet. There's the rest of the world too, right? There's Europe and Asia. And in China, I think China is probably what's driving this, because 5G in China is very high in the consumer mindset. But in North America, do you even think people who are on a super tight budget, on Cricket Wireless, walk into a Cricket store because they need a new phone and they're looking at $150, $200 phone? Do you think they care about 5G? I don't think they do.
the discussion we were having earlier, it's probably not in their top three, and yet AT&T will promote how Cricket runs on their 5G network. So it's something they promote, and I could totally see the store salesperson saying, "You don't want to be left out of the future." So.
Yeah, I guess if it doesn't cost the customer anything else extra,
Sure.
that it's just in there, and that's possibly where they're going to.
It's like 4K on 55-inch TV.
But here's the irony of this, right? Is that phone they're going to buy with that 480 5G is going to have a 720p display at 6.6 inches, and it's going to look like crap. And that's why I don't understand. It's like the priorities are a little off there. I think the 600 series with 5G made sense to me because that is still like, you can still buy a phone with a Snapdragon 600 series with enough RAM and a nice enough 1080p display that it makes this phone a pleasant experience to use. It's a little toned down in terms of pace compared to like a 700 series or 800 series flagship or mid-ranger. But I have never used a 400 series Snapdragon phone ever from anyone with enough RAM and with enough performance to feel like I wasn't frustrated. That's kind of why I asked OnePlus to send me the N100, because I want to know, is this even possible?
Do you think, how much of it do you think is just sort of competitive response to MediaTek, which of course has been gaining a lot of market share over the past year?
Well, there is also, you're right, that's actually a very, very good point you're bringing up, that MediaTek's really pushing prices down on their 5G chips as well. And as we know, as I said, China is definitely a market where you need 5G on everything. And they also are a market where people buy a lot of cheap phones. So, no, it makes sense. It's just, I think I'm more looking at our perspective here. Like, will the Moto G Play we just talked about with this Snapdragon 400 something be a 5G phone next year in 2022 when it's announced around CES or February or whatever it is? I want to say yes. But I'm not 100% sure that even by 2022, the customer will benefit other than being able to say, I'm future-proof.
Well, I think, what you're getting to is that it's a question of when and not if, right? Because there was some point in the 4G transition where that was it. Everything that was coming out was 4G, and you just sort of reached this scale and tipping point where there just are no new 3G phones. So at least from major manufacturers. Yeah,
I think I'd be more excited here if I could see a clear improvement on AT&T and even more of a gap with T-Mobile. And I think all that is coming right now. It's a lot of
that'll come. Yeah,
there's refarming going on in SA versus NSA
and carrier aggregation and NR and
carrier aggregation and Verizon really needs to step up their game on their sub-6 because, like, look, millimeter wave is incredible. It's outside my window right now. If I step out the door, it's just beautiful. But it's only beautiful from outside, and yeah, I mean, it's amazing that, speaking of affordable phones with 5G, it's amazing that TCL makes a $400 phone with millimeter wave 5G that doesn't suck. Kudos to them. And that Verizon somehow was able to make this happen, as a partnership with them, so that I can walk out the door with a $400 phone and get, like, literally gigabit speeds on my phone. But that's not where I think the people who are spending $200, $150 need to be, right? So
not yet, maybe.
We need more sub-6 performance. And I think with 4G, as you said, it was clear all of a sudden all the phones were 4G, but you really noticed the improvement. Like, it was faster. This is still not quite as clear to me. Like, at least here.
I don't know if that kicks in after we, release 16 or NR or carrier aggregation, but those are all things in the mix in terms of, okay, now you're really going to see the difference in sub-6.
Yeah. Last rumor, and I really am not sure what to think of it. Huawei is supposedly working on a successor to the Kirin 9000, which is their current flagship 5nm chip on the Mate 40 series. It's a kick-ass chip. I've done some benchmarks on it. It's up there with the 865, possibly almost 888, although, we haven't been able to do our own benchmarks on that. But this is supposed to be the follow-up, and it's the Kirin 9010, so 9010 instead of 9000. But of course they have to be working on a new chip. Maybe our regime will loosen things up and they'll be able to release a phone or chips or sell that chip to other companies or whatever. The thing that strikes me as off in this is the 3 nanometer claim.
Right.
You haven't heard anyone else talk about 3 nanometer. We're barely managing to do 5 nanometer right now.
Right.
So
right. When Apple released the M1, they described 5 nanometer as, pushing up against the laws of physics, right?
Yep.
Even though it's been around for a while at this point.
So we'll see. I mean, look, what's Huawei going to be able to do this year in mobile, right? Because we're changing governments. Like, I think that they should relax the consumer side of Huawei, restrictions. Like, I think
Sure.
that the GMS restriction and maybe this chip manufacturing restriction that they have should be lifted, because innovation is important and it drives the entire industry. And even though Qualcomm and Huawei are competing in 5G and other areas, I feel that that's why the healthy competition is what keeps them both doing great things. So I'm hoping that can be relaxed. I think it's going to be a difficult year no matter what, because they had to sell Honor, which was a big money maker for them, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I am positive that some folks in our government will wake up and realize that, yeah, it's fair potentially. I'm not necessarily 100% on board to say that network infrastructure is a national security thing and we might not want to put Huawei base stations in our towers. But at the same time, why can't I buy a freaking Huawei phone with Google mobile services,
I think it's an excellent question, and it's an excellent question why it applies to Huawei handsets and not other handsets from companies based in China that would presumably be subject to the same laws that raise concern about Huawei.
I mean, I kept joking last year about this. What happens when one day Trump wakes up and realizes OnePlus is a Chinese company? Because he probably doesn't understand that, because OnePlus sounds so English, right?
Or Motorola.
Yeah, Lenovo. No, I mean, of course, this doesn't matter now, but I think that the politicians really need to freaking learn how this stuff works a little more. And of course, I did not expect that from our current regime, but I do have some higher expectations from our upcoming government.
I'm inclined to think the new administration will look at things more rationally, and yet there's still a lot of pressure to not be seen as capitulating to China. So
yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think they can very quietly relax these things, and most of the common people won't even notice. You know what I'm saying? Because most people don't buy Huawei phones anyway. I think we have to wrap up. CES is next week. I'm planning hopefully a cool special show with some interesting guests. I'm not too excited about CES. I don't know about you, Ross, but
it's a lot of web pages.
We're virtual events, man. Like, I don't know. Look, it's important that we cover it, and I will cover it next week with my guests after the fact. We'll also cover the Samsung S-series launch, that next show. But I'm just not wrapping my head around this CS thing right now. I just can't get excited about it. It's not working for me. Sorry. Ross, you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, your various social media handles and websites people should visit?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Ross Rubin, RossRubin. I also co-host a podcast with Sean Dubervac called TechSpansive, which you can find at techspansive.com or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And look forward to connecting with folks.
Yes, folks, you should check out Ross's stuff. It's awesome. So you know where to find me, folks. I'm at Tanker on Twitter. That's at TNKGRL, like the comic book Tanker without the vowels. It's my Twitter handle and my Instagram handle. Twitter is a really good place to go if you want to just comment on the show and discuss the podcast, since there's really no way to do that in podcast apps these days. If you want to look at pretty pictures taken with various phones I'm reviewing, or pictures of the actual phones, go to Instagram and check that out. There is also a couple of YouTube channels for the show. YouTube.com/MobileTechPodcast is the main channel. It's where you'll find unboxings and sometimes reviews of the phones, mostly unboxings, because I want to give you visual references as to the products I'm discussing on the show. And then there is another channel, YouTube.com/MobileTechMore. you should subscribe to that. It's a new channel. We're lining up some content for it right now. It's going to be more around things like smart home, devices that talk to your phone and are relevant to the mobile ecosystem, but are not necessarily mobile devices. Some weird, quirky accessories and things that, I get pitched all the time that are kind of fun. So please subscribe to both YouTube channels, especially the new one. Appreciate that. Finally, the podcast lives at mobiletechpodcast.com. If you want to subscribe, you can find links there for all the major podcast apps. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, to name some of the more significant platforms. And so please subscribe, tell your friends, all that good stuff. And another thing I wanted to bring up, if you're on a podcast app and the podcast app lets you rate or review the show, consider doing that. It's really great for discovery. People who are listening to similar podcasts and they get recommended others through reviews and ratings, so it helps a lot. I want to point out that there's a donate link in the show notes, so please click through there and help the podcast. Help us grow, help us survive. It's just a PayPal link. It's pretty straightforward, so please consider that. And finally, I want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible's been with us since pretty much the beginning of the show, and they're a phenomenal platform. We have a special deal for you, a 30-day free trial. You get to keep a book at the end. If you're not already a customer, consider clicking through and helping us by helping Audible, or the other way around. They're a great platform. If you like books as much as I do, you like to read, but maybe your eyes are tired or you're a delivery driver driving around all day and you want to listen to some stuff. Check out Audible. They're the audiobook platform of choice. Great selection of books. Lots of them are read by the authors, which I really like. You get like some really epic stories there too. Like podcasts are short, right? An hour, half an hour, 2 hours. This is like 10-hour stuff, right? Like it really feels like you're taking a book in your hands and you're listening, and then you put it down for a bit, and then you go back to it the next day and you get more of the story. It's very episodic. I like that a lot. It feels like a real book to me. So check out Audible. They have a special deal for us. audibletrial.com/mobiletech is the URL. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Please consider clicking through, helping us, helping them, helping everyone. We appreciate it. And thanks to Audible for being with us since the early days. And Ross, thanks for being with us on the show this week.
Oh, it was wonderful. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. We will have another show next week, folks, so stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.